Hello everyone and welcome back to Movie On. Today we're going to do a review of the movie named The Reader from 2008. The movie begins in 1995 Berlin, where a well-dressed man named Michael Berg is preparing breakfast for a young brunette woman named Bridget, who has stayed the night with him. The two part awkwardly, and as Michael watches a tram pass by outside, it reminds him of his past as he sees a younger version of himself sitting in the tram, and the film flashes back to another tram in early 1958 Neustadt, West Germany, during a rainy winter day. An unhappy-looking teenage Michael gets off from the tram, but wanders around the streets afterwards, finally pausing in the entryway of a nearby apartment building where he starts to vomit. Hannah Schmitz, the tram conductor, comes in and sees Michael puking. She helps him get clean of the vomit with buckets of water. She sees Michael crying and picks him up, hugs him, and tells him it's going to be all right. She asks him where he lives and assists him in returning home. Michael reaches home to his family, and they're all eating while Michael's mother points out that he looks sick and needs to see a doctor. Michael's father says he looks fine, and the boy said he does not need a doctor. Michael's younger sister, Emily, replies that he does need a doctor, to which Michael replies that he does not need a doctor. Even after denying all medical attention, Michael's family gets a doctor for his checkup due to the fact that he's getting more sick. The doctor checks him and asks his age. His mother tells the doctor that Michael is 15 years old now. The doctor diagnoses him with scarlet fever and tells them he must be isolated completely and rest at home for the next 3 months. Michael's mother tells Emily to keep distance from Michael because he's contagious and shuts his door. All Michael can do is examine his stamps and bide his time. After he recovers as the spring season arrives, he returns to the apartment building to deliver a bouquet of flowers to Hannah at her apartment and thank her. She lets him in and he tells her that he was very sick with scarlet fever and was on bed rest for 3 months, which is why he came after that long time to thank her. She tells him to put the bouquet of flowers in the sink and tells him that it's good for him that he's well now. Michael decides and tells her that he's going to leave now, but she asks him to escort her to work on the tram line and wait for her in the hall for her while she gets dressed. However, when she catches him spying on her as she dresses, he runs away in shame. Later, he sees her on the tram but does not approach her. Michael returns to her apartment to apologize a few days later. He arrives before her and sees her coming upstairs with a bucket of coal. She sees Michael and tells him that there are 2 more buckets downstairs. Go fill them up and bring them back to her apartment. He brings the buckets of coal back to her apartment, looking all messed up with his face covered in coal dust. She laughs at him and tells him to see his face in the mirror, and he laughs too. She tells Michael not to worry and she will set a bath for him to clean up. She tells Michael to take his clothes off and get in the tub. She brings the towel for Michael while hiding herself behind it. Michael gets up from the tub and he turns his back for her and she covers him up with the towel. The camera moves backward and it's revealed that she's naked as well. She removes the towel and starts kissing Michael's back and asks him if this is what he wanted, and is this why he returned to her apartment. She turns Michael to face her and tries to kiss him, but he hesitates, so she tells him to look at her. He tells her that she's very pretty and kisses her back. The scene changes back to Michael at his house sitting with his family and eating food while he sits with a smile on his face. The scene shifts back and forth with Michael sitting and observing his family eating and he and Hannah making love to each other. Michael's family questions him why he got home so late, that his mother has been worrying about him. He lies and tells them that he got confused with the roads and got lost. His sister, Emily, accuses him that he's lying, that how could a person get lost in his own hometown? Michael's mother hushes her and tells her that she believes Michael because he never lies. Michael tries to find excuses to see Hannah, so he tells his family that he wants to continue his school, and he's much better now. His family advises him against it and tells him that the doctor has said he still needs bed rest of at least a week or 3. He ignores and proceeds to go to school anyways. After school, he rushes back to Hannah's apartment, and they both start to take off their clothes and jump in the bed. She teaches him how to make love, while he looks a bit worried and cheerful at the same time. After they're done making love, he persuades her to tell him her name. She gets a bit worried and asks why he wants to know her name. He tells her that he's been coming to see her 3 times, and what's wrong with it if he wants to know her name. She laughs and admires him, telling him that there's nothing wrong with it, and tells him that her name is Hannah. She asks him what his name is. He says, "I'm Michael." Michael returns to her every day after school, rejecting the clear interest of girls his own age. The two begin a sordid affair that lasts through that spring and the summer when he's off from school. Their liaisons, all at her apartment, are characterized by her asking him to read literary works he's studying in school, such as The Odyssey, The Lady with the Dog, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He sells his stamp collection so they can go on a bicycling tour in the countryside. They go together on the tour. They stop at a small restaurant to eat, where Hannah feels a bit overwhelmed because of her age, and Michael and a bunch of other kids around them. After their meal, they go to a chapel where she sees a bunch of kids singing in a choir. She starts crying with joy after listening to them. They go swimming in the lake, where Hannah asks Michael to join her, but he refuses. He tells her that he's writing a poem about her, and he will read it to her when it's completed. Michael is looking at the journal in which he's writing the poem about Hannah, and the scene cuts back to the current Michael in the present time in 1995, who is also looking at that same journal in which he wrote everything about his life with Hannah in a daily sequence. He leaves his place and heads to his car and rushes to reach the court. His assistant helps in wearing his black lawyer's robe and enters the courtroom. Everyone is seated in the room, and the scene cuts back to 15-year-old Michael, who's studying in the class and paying attention to Sophie, his classmate. After school, he goes swimming with his classmates, and he leaves them to see Hannah. When Hannah is promoted by the tram company to a better-paying position in an office job, she becomes unsettled. When Michael arrives at her apartment for one of their trysts, she suddenly snaps at him when he tries to read her Chekhov's The Lady with the Dog. She gives Michael a bath and washes him. They make love one last time, and she then moves away without telling him where she's going. Michael returns to her apartment and finds her place empty, and he's left alone, heartbroken. The scene cuts back to present Michael from 1995, who goes out on a dinner with his daughter, Julia, who's 21 at the moment and has just returned from a year in Paris. They both eat and catch up with each other. Michael drops his daughter off, and the scene cuts back to young Michael, but 8 years later, in 1966 this time. Michael is now 23 and attends Heidelberg Law School. As part of a special seminar taught by Professor Roll, a concentration camp survivor, he observes a trial of several women who were accused of letting 300 Jewish women die in a burning church when they were SS guards on the death marches following the 1944 evacuation of Auschwitz concentration camp. Michael is stunned to see that Hannah is one of the defendants. He visits a former camp himself to try to come to terms with this. The trial divides the seminar, with one student angrily saying there's nothing to be learned from it other than that evil acts occurred. He tells Roll that the older generation of Germans should kill themselves for their failure to act then and now to stop the Holocaust. The key evidence is the testimony of Ilana Mather, a young Jewish woman who has written a memoir about how she and her mother survived. When Hannah testifies, unlike her fellow defendants, she admits that she was aware the whole time that Auschwitz was an extermination camp. She also admits that all the SS guards, herself included, would randomly choose 10 prisoners each. These prisoners would then be executed to make way for the new prisoners that arrive so that overcrowding does not occur. In Hannah's case, she would choose the physically weak and less able-bodied prisoners to their deaths. She would also make the prisoners read to her. Every evening, Hannah would randomly choose one female prisoner to read a book to her in her office before taking them back to their cell, as she takes great enjoyment in being read to. Every prisoner that would read books to Hannah would be later killed. Michael, present in the court upon hearing this, gets very emotional and sad, and realizes about the time he spent with her was similar too, that he was weak and sick, and she helped him and made him read books to her and made love, only to be stranded alone and heartbroken in the end. Further charges against Hannah whilst an SS guard also included 300 counts of murder brought about when an aerial bombing raid by the Allied forces accidentally hit a church where the prisoners were sleeping for the night. The church's roof collapsed and a fire ensued. The prisoners tried to escape the burning church, however all exits were locked. The SS guards, Hannah included, had the power to unlock the exits to let the prisoners escape, but they did not. Only 2 prisoners survived, Ilana Mather and her mother. Hannah strongly denies that she personally authorized a report to lock the church exit doors, preventing the prisoners from escaping, despite pressure from the other defendants. When the prosecutor produces a document with Hannah's signature on it authorizing the church incident, she continues to deny the charges by claiming that someone forged her signature. However, when she's asked to provide a handwritten sample of her signature to compare it to the signature on the document, Hannah suddenly retracts her denials and admits to signing the document. In the courtroom audience, Michael then realizes Hannah's secret. She's illiterate and has made many of her life choices to conceal that. Even her choice to join the SS was made because of her desire to avoid a job promotion, meaning she would have had to reveal her illiteracy. Without being specific, Michael informs Roll that he has information favorable to one of the defendants, but is not sure what to do since the defendant herself wants to avoid disclosing this. Roll tells him that if he's learned nothing from the past, there's no point in having the seminar. Michael decides to confront Hannah in the prison, and goes to the prison only to chicken out at the last moment, and leaves the prison yard, while Hannah is waiting in the visiting area, unaware of who's going to visit her and where they are. Hannah receives a life sentence for her role in the church deaths, while the other defendants get prison terms of a few years. Upon hearing this, Michael starts shedding tears and heads back in the train, and the scene changes back to older Michael, but this time in 1976. Michael graduated from the law school and gradually became a successful lawyer. He married a young woman named Martha, and together they have a daughter whom they name Julia. But Michael remains emotionally withdrawn. His marriage ends a few years later when Martha leaves him, and he becomes distant from his daughter. Michael is on a train with his daughter Julia, and they're heading back to Neustadt, West Germany, his hometown. He goes to his parents' house with little Julia and visits his mother. He tells his mother that he has bad news to tell her, which is that he and his wife Gertrude are getting a divorce, and there's no need to worry about Gertrude because she's already a state prosecutor and she's earning far more than him already. He tells her that she will be all right. His mother tells him that she's not worried about Gertrude, but she's more worried about him. She tells him that you did not attend your father's funeral, yet you came back to break the news about your divorce. He tells her that it's hard for him to return to this town because of the past he had, a secret affair with a woman twice his age who also happened to be part of committing genocide. He heads to his old room and opens all of his old stuff. He grabs and opens a book which happens to be the Odyssey by Homer. He sits and reads it under the lamplight. Upon rediscovering his books and notes from the time of his affair with Hannah, he, knowing Hannah's secret that she cannot read, decides to re-establish contact with her by reading some of those works into a tape recorder. He sits all day and night on the table in the bed to record all the books and poems for her. He sends the cassettes and another tape recorder to her in prison. He sends her tapes of The Odyssey and Chekhov's The Lady with a Dog, which he was going to read to her last time when they had their final fight before Hannah disappeared. One day she goes to the library and asks for a book, The Lady with the Little Dog. She brings the book back to her cell and tries to learn and teach herself how to read and write. She plays Michael's recordings. At the same time, she pauses it and tries to read the words written in the book. She counts words and encircles them and learns to pronounce them by copying Michael. Eventually, she uses this to teach herself to read the books herself from the prison library and eventually writes back to him. It's 1980, and Michael checks his mail and finds a letter from Hannah. He opens the letter and it says that she liked his tapes and wants more. He records more tapes and sends them to her, but does not write back to her. Hannah receives the tapes and keeps sending him more letters, either criticizing the content in the tape or asking if Michael is getting her letters. She receives more tapes and expects letters from him, but Michael still does not write her back. It's 1988 now. The prison's warden writes to Michael to seek his help in arranging for the aged Hannah after her forthcoming release on parole. She tells him that she has been in prison for 20 years and she has no family, friends, or any place to live. She tells Michael that this new world is going to be frightening because the world has changed a lot and she'll have a job and a place to live. She tells him that he's the only one who contacts her and that she's aware that Michael does not visit her or write her, but only sends her tapes. Michael tells her that it's very kind of her to feel the need to care for Hannah and that she's contacted him, and he ends the call. Michael processes it for a few days about what he's going to do for her, and then he finally agrees to see Hannah in the prison. He arrives in the prison and meets Louisa Brenner, the prison warden who contacted Michael about Hannah's situation. She tells him that they were expecting him earlier, and takes Michael to Hannah. She tells Michael that she has held herself for the past few years, and she's changed. She tells him that she's taking him directly to the cafeteria because the prisoners have just finished their lunch. He reluctantly agrees to sponsor Hannah. He tells Hannah that he has a friend who's a tailor and is willing to offer her a job. He also tells her that he's found an apartment for her, and it's very small, but she'll like it, and she thanks him. He tells her that there are various social programs, cultural stuff that he can sign her up for, and the public library is very close to the apartment he found for her. He asks her, "You read a lot?" To which she replies, "I prefer being read to," which are the exact words she told Michael back in 1956 when they were having a secret affair and Michael suggested she read a book. She asks Michael if he got married. Michael tells her that he indeed got married and he has a daughter now. He tells her that he has not been able to see his daughter that much, probably because of his work, but he would love to see a great deal of her and spend time with her. He also tells Hannah that his marriage did not last long and he is divorced at the moment. He goes on and asks her if she's spent her time thinking about the past. With a shade of joy on her face, she responds if he means thinking about the past with him. With an offended look on his face, Michael replies no, he did not mean with him. He meant her past as an SS guard and the actions she took. She gets a bit sad and tells him no, she did not. Before the trial, she did not think about her past in Auschwitz. She never had to. He asks her what about now? What does she feel now about her measures that got her on the road of torture that ended her up in prison? She tells him it doesn't matter what she feels. It doesn't even matter what she thinks, because the dead are still dead. That they are not getting their lives back if she thinks she's guilty or feels that she did something very brutally wrong, something that robbed so many people of the chance of having a better standard of life. He tells her that he only wanted to know this because he was not sure what she learned from this. She tells him that she's learned plenty of it. She tells him that she has taught herself and learned how to read. He sighs and tells her that he'll pick her up next week. She tells him that it sounds like a good plan and to take good care of himself. He tells her to take good care as well and leaves the prison. The next week, before Michael comes to pick her up from prison, we see Hannah in her cell, collecting some of the books and placing them together on the table and dragging the table in the middle of the cell. She slowly takes her shoes off and puts them aside. She stands on the table and on the books and commits suicide by hanging herself in the cell. When the time of her release arrives and Michael comes to the prison to pick her up, only to find out that she's committed suicide and left him alone once more. The warden takes Michael to Hannah's cell. Michael sees that Hannah had written a paragraph from the book The Lady with the Dog on a page and pasted it on the cell wall. The warden tells him that Hannah had left a note for Michael. It's more like a will. The warden reads the will for him, which states that there's a tea tin with cash in it and there are 7,000 marks in the bank, handed over to Michael Berg, who will forward it to the daughter who survived the fire. It is for her. She would decide what to do with it. And tell Michael that I said hello. She leaves Michael with a task to give her life savings to the family of one of the prisoners at Auschwitz. Michael starts to cry in the cell while the warden hands him the tea tin. Later, Michael travels to New York to meet Alana. She was the prisoner at Auschwitz who survived the fire and was in the court with her mother and pointed out the guards who did not free them and left them to burn and die. Michael reaches her fancy place, and Alana's maid tells Michael to wait in the hall for her. Michael looks around her apartment, and Alana arrives and tells Michael that she was expecting him. She asks Michael what brought him here in the United States. He tells her that he was already here in the United States. He was attending a conference in Boston. She asks if he's a lawyer, and he says yes. She tells him she read his letter, and she was intrigued by it, but she did not entirely understand it. She asks him if he attended the trial 20 years ago. Michael tells her that he did indeed attend the trial. He was a law student at the time, and he remembers seeing Alana and her mother at the court very clearly. She tells Michael that her mother died in Israel many years ago. Michael gives her his condolences. He cuts to the chase and tells her that perhaps she must have heard that Hannah Schmitz recently died. She killed herself by hanging herself in her prison cell. She assumes Michael's looks and asks him if Hannah was a friend of his. He says that she was kind of a friend. He tells her that Hannah was illiterate for most of her life, meaning probably even the time when she was an SS guard. She asks him if that is the explanation of her behavior or an excuse. He responds no. He tells her that Hannah was illiterate and she liked it when someone else read anything to her. He tells her that's why he sent her recorded tapes of books and literature while she was in prison, and she educated herself. She taught herself how to read and write with the help of his recorded tapes and books of the same tapes. Alana knows that Hannah also liked it when she made the prisoners in the camps read things to her. She starts to weep and asks if he would start by being honest with her, at least start that way. She confronts him properly by asking him what the nature of his and Hannah's friendship was. Michael confesses and tells her that when he was young, he had an affair with Hannah. He tells her that he was only 16 when their affair started, and it only lasted for one summer, but... She asks, but what? Michael pauses, and she realizes that Michael was in love with her. She asks him if Hannah Schmitz acknowledges the effect she had on his life. He too gets all weepy and emotional and tells her that she had done worse to so many people that he does not believe she acknowledged him, even though Hannah admits to him that she did not even think or acknowledge about the victims before the trials. He confesses that he had never told anyone about his secret affair with Hannah, except until now. She tells Michael that people ask her about the camps all the time. What have you learned from them? She says the camps were not some sort of therapy that you should learn from. They were not some kind of universities you go to learn. She tells him that one becomes very clear about these things. She asks him what he wants. Forgiveness for her? Or does he just want to feel better for himself? She tells him that he should go to the theater if he's seeking catharsis, or go to literature, but please do not go to the camps. Nothing comes out of the camps. He finally tells her why he's here at her place. and what Hannah actually wanted for Alana. Michael tells her that she left you her money and wanted you to have it. She asks him what she's supposed to do with her money. He tells her however she thinks is the best way to spend it. He reaches into his bag and takes out the tea tin from Hannah with her money in it. He hands her the tin, and she sees the tin and smiles, because it reminds her of the time when she was a little girl herself and would collect treasures in a tea tin. She tells him that she took it with her to the camp, but it got stolen. Michael asks what was in it. She tells him just some sentimental things, a hair of their dog, some tickets to the opera. She opens the tin, sees the money, and slides it towards Michael, and tells him that they're of no use for her, that this money is associated with the extermination of the Jews. Michael suggests that he should donate the money to an organization that encourages adult literacy. He asks if there's any sort of Jewish organization that does that. She tells him that there are all kinds of Jewish organizations now. Michael takes the money and asks her if he should donate them in Hannah's name, to which she replies however he sees fit. Alana keeps the tea tin since it's similar to the one she herself had owned before being sent to the camps, where it was taken from her to be melted down. In the present day of 1995, Michael reunites with his daughter, Julia. He admits his failings as a father and drives her to a church that he and Hannah had visited during their bicycle tour nearby 40 years earlier, so they can reminisce about the old times. He shows her Hannah's grave and begins to tell her his and Hannah's story. To watch more explanations of these kinds of movies, click on the thumbnails on your screen. And don't forget to share your thoughts about today's video in the comments section. Kindly like the video and subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any new videos. And at last, I will say, stay safe, stay well, see you next time, and thanks for watching.